All right. Hello, everybody. I am Lauren G. Foster, and I am talking today with my new friend, Adam. And we have landed on this subject of cultural and spiritual appropriation and realized how vast and giant it is. And so we wanted to explore the subject together. So we're going to do that. But before we get started, tell us a little bit about who you are, Adam, and what
Oh,
excellent people.
yeah. Okay. Where to start with that? My name's Adam Digby, Gibbs-Digby, my married name. And where to start? So my background is very rooted in mental health, specifically, most recently, young people and adolescent mental health. But what brings me here today is more of my spiritual um, path of existence. So, from that perspective, I am a celebrant, and also um, how we have met through our training as One Spirit and working towards One Spirit ministry. Um, so, I have always had an interest in the spiritual side of life, and an interest in different cultures and how that's celebrated. And at one point, about a year or so ago, started delving into writing a book. And it was just kind of like a little handbook of all of the practice that I understand and like and interests me, and just kind of a collection of stuff. But And I think this is where our conversations then started to overlap. In I had done some delving into cultural and spiritual appropriation, and just wow, blew my mind and really
Oh,
opened it
huge.
up. And
Yeah.
that's kind of is my introduction, but also brings us to how you and I have started talking and collaborating, I guess.
Right. And we are absolutely going to dive right in, but I also want you to tell us about animoods.
Okay, Animoods. Animoods is uh, a new product that I have spent. It was supposed to be make some mood cards and sell them really quickly, and then it turned into a 4 year project of just love. Um, so it is in a nutshell, it's a new mood card deck that I have designed with a young artist, and it's anime themed, and it's lots of artist impressions of different emotions, and you turn them over, and there's information on that emotion calling from or rooted in DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, practice and theory. And also within that deck, you've got 10 skills cards, which are evidence based skills to support people to work through and understand their emotions. And the sort of emotional regulation is the term that we use, but it's basically understanding, recognizing, and how to manage emotions. It's in a really exciting phase at the moment. I've just sent off all of the electronic stuff to the factory for demo packs
Okay.
to be printed. So
So
starting 2025 in a very different, active, exciting position
very
with
good.
that project. So thank you for asking.
Yes, and wherever you are, wherever you're watching this video, look around and there will be a link to if this is finished and available, if it's in testing or whatever, we'll figure out a way to.
Yeah, there's a website, so that website will become active when you can buy them. But at the time being, the website, the link will be there wherever that's positioned, and you can go on and just sign up an email address, and you'll get updates and things like that. And it's on all social media stuff. It's all on that website link. So yeah.
Perfect. I'm excited. I think that's a brilliant concept. Okay, so cultural and social appropriation. So I think it's important to note that our goal is not to come to a conclusion because I don't believe there is one,
Yeah,
or to
absolutely.
really answer any questions for anybody, but just to explore this topic and to see where we as conscious, mindful human beings should land, and finding the balance and respecting one another, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so part of what so I'm out traveling the world, and I'm kind of like a professional spiritual appropriator. So it's really important to me to try and understand what's the right and the wrong of this. So like, I've been in ayahuasca ceremonies and temazcal ceremonies, and celebrated with my Israeli host and hostess their rituals that they have on Friday nights, and just all of this different stuff. And every time something speaks to my heart, I kind of bring it into my practice and I share it with my people. And it's been suggested that this is kind of stealing. And so that's what's got me delving into this and wanting to figure this out.
Mm.
And then you and I had the conversation about sage, which I think is a great place
Yes.
to start. So because I was saying, oh, I think I want to smudge. And then that brought up the subject of how using sage can be spiritual and cultural appropriation and economically damaging. And so tell us about the whole sage.
So so I started looking into this, and I happened across it completely by accident when I was kind of drafting and making notes on, learning sage, spiritual cleaning of the area, um, and all the reasons that we kind of would burn sage. And it really, I mean, it wasn't stuff that I didn't already know, but I had never applied that knowledge to that area. So thinking about, um, what's the intention behind it? What are the practices? Where does that come from? And part of kind of spiritual appropriation is adoption of, or um, taking on spiritual practices, symbols, traditions that then perhaps disconnect it from the cultural history. So there's something about kind of understanding why you're doing it and the origins of it. So there's something about kind of respect within just educating yourself. So I was like, okay, we're all right, tick. I understand that. But then there was sort of the hidden underside of it. So what I was reading, in kind of a bit of a nutshell, is there's been sort of this boom with social media and people burning sage and kind of influencers and actually really beautiful equipment to do this in very lovely modern houses and sort of this trend. And actually what that's done is it's increased. You put a social media post out and it reaches like 30,000 people. That's potentially going to be a percentage of those people that are going to go, oh, I'm going to do that because that sounds really good. For whatever reasons they're attaching to it. I'm not saying that everybody's mistreating the practice, but all of those people are going to go out to look for. So there's a demand in supply. When we think about where sage comes from and the conditions that you need to grow it in and countries of origin and all of this, then what you end up with is kind of increasing the need to supply, which has environmental impacts. And I started looking into, and I have got some notes on the other screen that I will have a look at. So things that I never even thought of that happen as a result of this. And this is where kind of my systemic mental health pack comes on. Everything's a system, everything's interrelated, everything's connected, comes in. So thinking about the environmental impact. So if you've got a field that yields a crop of, let's say, 100 bundles of sage, and there's 100 people that usually buy that, and supply and demand is kind of just self-sustaining and balancing. If I've now got an extra 100 people that want to buy from my field, I've got to expand my field. So where do I go to get that space? So there is sort of soil depletion. I've then got to use extra water to field my extra field that's now providing 200 bundles of sage rather than 100. I've got to look after pesticides and think about how I'm going to make sure that so actually instead of using pesticides on a field of 100 bundles of sage, I'm now using additional pesticides to look after 200 bundles of sage. So
Mm.
all of this stuff that I had never thought about And then there's sort of the biodiversity stuff. So large fields being dedicated to one crop and then not another. So what happens to the population that reliant on that other or the demand needs of that other? Well, then they're going to start having to compete because if I've got my 2 fields of sage and you're growing potatoes and you're needing to increase your, where are you getting your stuff of potatoes from? Or I buy your field of potatoes and then that's that out of the market chain. So,
Yeah.
so there are
I'm,
these
I'm
impacts.
going
You
to
know,
be
it's
devil's
not going to be
advocate here,
potatoes,
even
but
though I don't disagree with anything that you're
yeah,
saying.
yeah, yeah.
Wouldn't this also be the case with anything? So
Absolutely anything. Yeah, it would.
anything. So if
And it's and
suddenly,
it's all
uh,
that competition stuff.
yeah, so suddenly someone says, "Oh, you absolutely must." I mean, stevia is one of my absolute favorite plants. And I'm
Mm,
discovering it's very difficult to find in the world. But when you leave the United States, it's not easy to find. It's in very specialty markets. It's expensive. But if some really, really influential person were to say everyone must use stevia, and then the same thing would happen. They would
yeah.
take resources away from growing something else to growing that, or take away forest or take away anything. So that makes perfect sense. So, but let's dial it back a little bit because that's too much for my brain.
so so supply all over, but I guess that's just a really good example of the unintended consequences
Okay.
of spiritual practice
Okay.
or the unintended consequences of adding to that market of which if you then bring it back to yourself and you start to educate and you start to think about and I think that's part of it, isn't it, is
Mm,
spiritual practice for me at least is thinking about as well as other things my place in and my impact on
mhm.
and how does my practice influence other systems and hopefully always practicing in or trying to practice in a way that influences in a positive way. And if I find that I'm not, I stop and think. And actually, that journey just made me stop and think, what is the purpose behind me doing this?
Mhm.
And just thinking about practice in that way. And actually, are there other ways that I could achieve the same thing because that is something that is meaningful to me or connects with me and resonates with me? Um, can I grow my own sage? I started looking into that. And
Mhm.
actually, for me, that's much more because then you are kind of honoring the process of really being ingrained in that process and with that process and so yeah that's just a really interesting example that led us to kind of really unpicking and thinking but it's much wider than that isn't it
It really
it's
is.
not just about sage.
Right. It's always, I think it's always going to, we're going to explore a bunch of other things, but I think it's always going to come back to intent and reverence and respect because a lot of things I have some things that I wanted to share here. So I have this headset, this little headdress that I commissioned a local artist to make this for me. And it goes on kind of like this. And it's made with labradorite stones. And I, I just wanted something that would show that I was the minister that was doing the wedding. That was just a special piece of jewelry to wear for ceremonies. And and I also have a cloak that that probably is appropriated from somewhere else. But I had no intention of stealing this from any religion or any culture. And I had seen something on an old TV show like Merlin. Um, and one of the girls was wearing something like, "Oh, I want something this." But then as we started this conversation, I put in a description of this or a photograph of this into Chat GPT and said, what is this being appropriated from? And there's 3 different cultures that have headdresses like this. So are we to stop every single thing that we do and, oh, let me make sure, because humanity's 200,000 years old, nothing's new anymore. And
Yeah.
you know, and originally we all came from Africa. So something, everything has already been done. So how do we have any freedom of expression and still, not be appropriating? I guess that's the big question.
And it's a potentially messy question.
It's, oh
And
yes,
I think
big time messy.
and it's completely loaded. And I feel the need to say clumsy but caring is something that I've picked up from my mental health field, that always am I trying to be respectful, thoughtful, understanding. If someone comes at me and says, actually, that's wrong or whatever, listening.
Mhm.
But I might get it wrong at times. But there was a phrase that I picked up while I was kind of doing this reading and getting really fascinated by it. Actually,
Mhm.
uh, it might not mean that I personally stopped burning sage. Totally unrelated incident. I nearly burnt my office down whilst doing it one day. So I was like, actually, that's probably not a good thing. The universe is giving
Okay.
me a very clear signal here. I need to stop this practice. And you and I then started talking about sound cleansing. Well, actually, that's going to have come from somewhere.
Mhm.
That there would be people that have been doing it long before you and I picked that up as an idea. So
Mhm.
it's the cultural appreciation versus cultural appropriation. So
Mhm.
how do you strike that balance? So if you're appreciating it, it's about respectfully engaging with the culture whilst learning about the significant elements, seeking permission where it's appropriate to do so. Um, Not always are we going to be able to do that, but it's about the intention of and the intention behind, and how you're positioning yourself respectfully in relation to that practice or task or use of item or clothing or whatever. Acknowledging and giving credit to the culture, avoiding condemning or reducing elements to just kind of trends and you're just doing it mindlessly, being mindful rather than mindless. And I have a similar story to your headdress. When I started doing ceremonies, I did my first wedding ceremony, and I was kind of looking. My journey into interfaith was through looking at celebrant work and performing wedding ceremonies, and there was this little thing in the back of my head that just felt there was something missing, and I wanted to know how can I authentically provide a spiritual element to my practice? It just felt like I was completely shutting that down and it just wouldn't sit comfortably with me, which then got me looking at what spiritual practices fit with me and that I could go into training with. So explored into faith and one spirit, and that's how I've ended up on that journey in a very short space of narrative. And I was looking at how do you, as the celebrant, um, or the person officiating the ceremony, stand out from the other people that are present? For me, that felt important.
Mhm.
I was officiating, the conductor of the orchestra. I was making that process happen. So I was looking into stoles. Now, I come from my context of religion, spiritual growing up was Church of England, Christianity. So I was familiar with church, robes, stoles, ceremonial dress. And I was like, I wonder what a stole actually. So I started researching and looking into what's the purpose of a stole. I found that actually it's not just Christianity or Catholicism that use that as part of the. It's found in lots of different cultures, and it's a symbol of ministry. How do you visually, verbally, tactilely? How do you step into your ministerial practice or your spiritual practice or whatever it is that you're practicing? How do you portray that to the world? So I was like, okay, so I've done the research, I've looked into it, I feel comfortable enough to hold my own. I haven't got it covered with different symbols and things like that. I actually what I've done is I my beliefs are that there is something greater than all of us that sits outside of science. I sometimes refer to it as the divine. I often say the universe. I have an absolute fascination with the heavens and stargazing and the universe and the galaxy and the science aspect of it. So my stole is a sort of a cosmos thing, because for me that is spiritually what my ministry believes. So I am visually putting out there a representation of me and what you get with me if you came to me and we were working together in any context. So, and again, similar to your story, it's about understanding, doing why you're doing what you're doing, and appreciating rather. And someone actually picked me up on it. I was on social media and I shared some pictures to this group of my first ever wedding ceremony, and someone messaged me privately and was like, you're wearing something that's only ever found in church. Why are you doing that? Like, you say that you're spiritual, and I was like, well, and I was able to articulate why I was doing it and how I was doing it, and I checked out. So we entered into a dialogue of it, and he was like, I never knew that.
Mm.
But had it just been a case of, oh, I just did it because that's what you do, how authentic is that to me and my ministry and my practice? How useful is that to the people? How seriously am I really taking it if I'm just doing it because?
Mhm.
Um,
So I like that you use the word seriously, because I mean, yes, it is you and I as ministers, celebrants, being holding space in this capacity, in the spiritual, that we do need to take things more seriously than someone who is just being an accountant. And that, but what about,
Context is important.
yes, it is. So toga parties, costumes at Halloween, ear piercing. This came from some culture. What if I was walking around downtown Manchester, just looking around, and this subject is so much on
Yeah.
my mind. Tattoos. If I got my nose or my eyebrows or any other body part or any sort of symbol tattooed on me, that came from somewhere. And does the ordinary citizen owe it to the rest of humanity to figure out where it came from, or do we get to just go through life, you know, and enjoying what we enjoy and getting on with it? And again, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that question, but well,
No, and I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. And I'm very aware as I say that for some people that might touch a nerve and they may have a very different opinion to that. And I think, well, actually that's okay to
yeah,
have a different opinion.
then it's going to boil down to the two people. This person says, and but the event that kind of put this in my head made me want to write the article that I'm researching in this conversation, was that when I was very young in junior high, I wore my hair like Bo Derek did in the movie 10. Actually, not even really. They're called cornrows when it's braided very close to your scalp and then hanging down. We
Mm.
weren't that good at braiding, so I was just my hair was just a bunch of tiny little braids. And the African American girls in my class didn't like that I was wearing my hair that way. And I certainly had no. It was just a hairstyle to me. It didn't have any meaning of any kind, from anything. It was just a way to wear my hair. It didn't have any meaning. And so, but in that context, if we had been old enough to be able to articulate that, that could have been a conversation. Yeah, this offends me because of this, and this. Oh, yeah, I understand that. And sorry, or sorry that you feel that way. I get to wear my hair
Mm.
however I want, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so a very
It's
messy.
the being, it's the being able, and I think this is something that we are learning in ministry of interfaces, being able to hold two opposing
Mhm.
sides at the same time and try to find some way of that sitting with the discomfort of that
Right,
as
right,
just one aspect. It's not everything that we do, but that's
right.
an element of it.
One aspect.
And actually, that story as given, you were
Say that
respectful
again.
and
The first part
but
of the sentence got swallowed somehow. Start again.
oh, so I was just saying that the resonates with me from your story, if we take that as given, is actually part of our task as interfaith ministers. Part of our task, a part of our task would be to take opposing perspectives and be able to hold the discomfort of those two opposing perspectives, um, and kind of find a way through it that is okay enough for
Mhm.
both parties. It's not about right versus wrong. And again, these are very touchy subjects sometimes, depending on the context and the listener and everything that's going on. But actually, in that situation, you were respectful. You listened to the other side's opinion and perspective. You were open to being educated, and at the same time, not but, and at the same time, you have the right to wear your hair however you like, and that stuff is influenced
Mhm.
from it filters down, and it's influenced and it's different and it gets picked up. It's about being respectful
Mhm.
in the moment. If
Yeah.
you're respectful in the moment and you're not acting in a way that is, or you are trying to act in a way that is not going to add to the problem. I'm not saying it gives you a free pass, but it it makes the situation easier and maybe progresses it in a positive direction.
I kind of think that we should, as human beings, give one another a free pass. If everyone were acting in kindness and everyone were
Yeah.
acting in love and respect for one another, then it wouldn't matter the things that we don't know. How we, Brene Brown, it was interesting that Brene Brown was one of her videos was in part of our homework recently. Maybe you've
Oh, yes,
or
yes,
not.
yes. I've seen
But
that, and I've used that in the mental health empathy.
yeah,
Um,
I take kind of issue with how she addressed sympathy there, but she had another story about she had been shortchanged or something, and she used the word gypped. So I felt so gypped. She meant nothing derogatory by that at all, but someone from the audience came up afterwards and said that was offensive to gypsies,
mm,
right? So. And the standard for someone like Brene Brown, who is being heard by so many people, has to be a little bit higher. But at the same time, really, I mean, that seems to be just a little bit oversensitive to me. That, a word that has wiggled its way into our vocabulary and its original meaning completely lost, or
mm,
the
yeah.
original reference completely lost. I mean, how nitpicky should we be with one another? And
I think sometimes when I hear these things, I get an idea of a scale, and sometimes we sing in so far in one direction, and gradually we start to course correct a little bit, and we swing back somewhere fluidly within the middle. And I get that scale on that story.
yeah.
Um, but the intention, and in my head, that links you back to kind of the intention. And if we go back to thinking about appreciation versus appropriation,
Mhm.
what's the intention behind what we're doing?
Let me show you another little artifact.
A feather bundle, in my naming what I see.
Yeah,
Tell me your
that's
rebuttal.
what it is to me too. But I suspect, since this conversation has come up, that this has a sacred name in Native American cultures and other indigenous cultures, where this is used for wafting sacred smoke around, and this is used in a very
Mm-hmm.
ceremonial manner. And for me, that I made this every single feather I found. It's put together with a leather band that says Ireland on it. So this is this is something that lives on my altar, that I cherish as, little bits that the earth gave to me as I was traveling, and, memories and freedom and mindfulness and beauty. And, this has a lot of sacred meaning to me that doesn't have anything to do with what culture it might have been
Mm.
appropriated from. So then that brings me to ask the question, is that okay? Is it okay for me to invent new things that have elements of who knows how many different
Yeah,
cultures? And am I obligated to go and figure out what they are?
that's a really interesting question.
Yeah. And I'm not expecting you to have the answer, but
No, but if I was to take a stab at the answer, if I was to take a stab at the answer after letting it settle for a moment with my little, that's a really interesting question, thinking, oh God, where do I go with this one? I think my answer would be um, if you were to start using that in ceremony work as a public facing minister, and I'm not asking you this question for you to answer now, but if you choose to, then great. But I'm just thinking out loud. If you were to, so that's something that is part of your personal spiritual practice. It has got a huge amount of significance for you. It's very personalized. It's something that sits on your altar. There's probably lots of memories, arguably, possibly connected to each one of those feathers from when you found them on your travels and things like that. It's very symbolic to you and personal to you. If you started using that in a much more public facing, would you, or wouldn't you, maybe you wouldn't feel the need, but would you educate yourself more as to what that symbolically might represent? Context is really important in this stuff,
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
think.
interesting.
That
Yeah,
that would be my attempt at this is unscripted. This we don't know where this
no, we
conversation is
don't.
going.
We don't.
My knowledge bank, that's how I would start with trying to figure out some sort of an answer to that question.
Mhm.
Context is really important.
It really is. And so I'm thinking about that there have been something similar to this was used in a ceremonial situation that I was in at a retreat once before. And the retreat leader was not Native American. She made no explanation as to where that came from, but no one in our group would have. I know it didn't even come up. It's never was never a question for me as to, oh, does she have a right to use this very indigenous people type of practice? I mean, it it just didn't, but that's the way that my mind works. And then when I was in Peru, a shaman was doing a little ceremony with me in his shop and sold me this item, which I should have I didn't know we were going to talk about it, or I would have looked up to see what the names actually are.
Mm,
But it was confiscated at customs on the way out because it used feathers of an endangered bird. I don't know what significance or relevance that story has. But I mean that doesn't feel very sacred to that. I mean, he
no,
sold it to me. It's a sacred item, and yet he sold it to me. He didn't require that I take on his religion or um, so is he appropriating his own culture by,
yeah,
yeah,
sort of almost capitalizing it.
yeah, yeah. So again,
The flip, the flip thing that comes up in my head around that is going back to your field of potatoes and my field of sage.
Mhm,
Like the positives of my demand is you were retiring from potato farming and I bought your field off you,
mhm,
so no harm there.
mhm,
I've also given additional work to your employees because I've inherited them also.
mhm,
So actually, I come out the hero in that situation.
mhm. Yeah.
Um, I have managed in another scenario to very aggressively purchase your field, and now you and three others are out of a job. I am no longer the hero in that situation,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I don't tell people that. I'm so just thinking of the parallels of actually careful, like if we think in perhaps spiritual context, balance and how fragile balances are,
Mhm,
and in our practice as ministers, our very outward facing, representing a one spirit interfaith position,
Mhm.
how are we contributing to that very delicate balance of holding cultures and holding practice? And I mean, we finished with the metta prayer in our last session. I then started to read up on the metta prayer. It's from a Buddhist practice.
Mhm.
Immediately, I was like, I wonder if that could be adapted to be more encompassing of interfaith. I'm changing something from another culture. What's the purpose and the intention behind that? Can I ask permission? Who would I even go to
Would you
ask
ask?
permission? But went through the thinking of it. And then that led me to, I wonder if it's been already done. Is there an equivalent from an interfaith position of that prayer? So it's those kind of questions. Would I have done that soul searching if I was just going to use that as a small part of my personal practice that I'm not sharing outside?
Mhm.
Maybe I'd have given it more thought, but I probably, if I'm being really brave and honest, probably would have given it less because it was easy to remember. It resonates with me. It covers the areas that I want good stuff to be happening and generating in.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And we're studying the Tao, and I was just looking at three different translations of the same verse, and they're they're not the same. Every time a human, any human, which the human who writes it down, the human who translates it, and every
mm,
time a human touches something, they change it in some way.
yeah,
Just because we're leaving our DNA and our spiritual DNA all over everything. And at some point, I feel like we've got to just relax and let it be okay, and trust our intuition, our instincts to tell us who to trust, because you can't instantly just go, oh, this is a man of God, I can trust him, because that's definitely not the case. If
yeah,
you can ask any of the cult victims across the world.
absolutely.
But yeah, if we're all in touch with our own intuition, and we're all just doing everything in good faith, then I think that it ought to be okay. I was going to ask about some other items on my, oh, you know what? I have money, on my altar. What do you
Oh,
think?
I see. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, different bills from all the countries that I've been to, plus coins from
Hmm.
the different countries. And this is a representation. Now, I feel like there are people who would go, oh, you are advocating the worship of money. Which I'm not, but this is a symbol to me of freedom, of travel, of diversity, of abundance. So this small little item has a lot, oh goodness, has a lot of symbolism for me. And, you know, when I get back to Norway, I can spend that 50 crowns, when, it's not. Yeah, so that's a thing. And then, oh, all right, here's the other thing, chakra stones. So, which Eastern religion does the concept of chakras come from? And
Yep.
how much are we appropriating that whole concept? And I don't ever hear anybody go, oh, well, this came from this religion. This is the person that invented the concept of the energy centers. And
And I guarantee you, if you walk into any spiritual shop, there will be something to do with chakras, either stones or the color chart system that goes along with it, posters,
yeah.
all of that stuff.
Yeah, and the another thing that has come up for me recently is I'm studying Qigong, and the old ways of Qigong were very, very secret, that only the masters knew them,
Yep.
and they only taught them to very specific students. And it's almost like this spiritual power and this really good stuff was kept back from the ordinary people, and reserved for special people. And I love the idea of knocking down all of those walls and, sharing the message that everybody is worthy. Every single
Yeah.
person is worthy of all the secrets, of all the power, of all the love, all the divine intelligence, all the stuff. So that's my rebel side. That's like I don't appropriation, smoke creation. It's it's loving, it's good, it's kind, it's respectful, it's helpful, it's in service to my fellow man. I'm not going to worry about where it came from. That's not the final word, just one of the words. So, yeah.
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 Wow. So, how do people, if people are listening to this, in because we don't know where this is going or how we're going to use it, or so, but
Right.
if people are listening to this, what, how do they navigate? Like, what are some take homes that would keep people safe enough within this incredibly challenging subject area of, because I was, and this was a story that I shared with you, which led to us having this conversation. I was talking to a friend of mine who absolutely went off at me about the sage discovery. And I wasn't by any means forcing, I was sharing my knowledge. I wasn't forcing my opinions. I'm not saying that burning sage, I used to burn sage until I nearly burnt my office down. And then I decided that I would stop doing that.
Mhm.
And I had, let's be clear, I hadn't given it up. I started to think more about where I was getting my sage from and delving a little bit further into that and supporting schemes that were attached to helping farmers. And so, but there's an underbelly to everything. There's a shadow side to a lot of things.
Mhm.
So I was going out of my way to think a bit more appropriately about it because I was thinking I might use it in ceremony and it feels ethical and spiritually comfortable for me. But I was talking to a friend of mine and we had a right. I mean, I was very shocked by their reaction to what I was saying, but I was like, wow, this is actually a very difficult subject to have a meaningful conversation about without upsetting. And I just wonder what would be a good enough starting position for someone who is either starting out or who is interested in delving into this or
Mhm.
just thinking more about their practice and what the wider implications and what that means. I just wonder what might be some advice from our
It is
experience that we could
a
give.
really good question. If you're seeing this wherever and you want to comment, look down. There's going to be a place to comment if it's on a blog, if it's on YouTube, wherever we decide to share this.
And I hope that there will be loads of people that want to comment and share their insights
Yeah.
and experiences because we certainly have never claimed, and I would never claim to know it all or be any sort of an expert
No, not at all. But
in
just
this
trying to
subject area.
find a common ground among all of the different people. And, and if you think about the United States, where I'm from, all of our culture came from other places. We're
Mm.
a melting pot. Except for, the indigenous people, which sadly, most of that culture has been lost. Which I mean, that's not unique to the United States. That's
I
kind
was
of,
going to say it's not unique to the United States. There's plenty of other countries that you could list off that have found
right.
themselves in similar
Yeah.
positions.
So other than our indigenous people, all the rest of us are all immigrants, and we all brought bits and pieces of our culture from wherever we originated from, and turned it into this new culture that is the blend of all of those things. And
Which
yeah,
is a big selling point as someone who's not in the United States, as an outsider looking in. That is something that, as a country, is a statement of being proud of.
yeah,
The melting pot of difference is a something that the United States are very proud of.
mhm, yep. Yep, and as I'm traveling around the world and just even within the UK. There's a difference between people in Manchester and a difference between, that here and further north in the rural areas. And
Mm,
as you're talking to people from the UK, they know differences from all the different regions. This group of this area, these people are like this, and these people are like this. And in the United States, that is the case as well. And I don't know. I wonder how someone who grew up in the South, like I did, and someone who grew up in New York, that we call them Yankees, the Yankees and the Southern people. I mean, just those cultures melding, and where all of that can and should and will go. No, I don't know. And another thing that's really interesting to me is that when I set out on this journey, I didn't realize how many stereotypes that I have in my head. Um, but I do. I got to Ireland and I expected to see beautiful alabaster skinned, redheaded, green-eyed beauties everywhere. And instead, everybody looked like me. Everybody looks the same just about everywhere. You can't
yep.
tell where we're from till we open our mouth, right? And yeah. And so I don't know. It's fascinating. Our world and the humans that inhabit it are
Yeah.
source of endless
Yeah.
fascination.
Which is probably one of the elements that has driven us both to the path that we find each other on.
Yeah. So, a lot of things divide us. That my mission is to find what is keeping us apart and get rid of it. Sometimes it's religion, sometimes it's politics, sometimes it's, there's so many different things that get between us. And my mission in life is removing those barriers so that we can all, celebrate our oneness.
Yeah.
That's the
If
fun
we
part.
if we just, I mean, this is ideal world aiming for, but if we just looked at and spent as much time investing in the stuff that we have in common as much as we spend time investing in the stuff that we don't have in common,
Mhm.
I think we would be looking across globe at a very different picture.
So much better, yes. And at the same time, blending in with that, the love and celebration of our differences. That I feel like that's a gift that I have when I meet somebody that is so different than me. I'm just so curious and I just want to know all about it. And I love hearing different viewpoints and people that are different than me. And
And I think that's why I say it's about spending as much time and effort focusing on what does as well as what doesn't, because
yeah.
actually then you're coming back to that kind of image of balance.
Mhm.
You're balancing it out, and actually you're going to find yourself in a very different place. So maybe it becomes a celebration of the difference than kind of allowing that difference to be the only thing, because the balance is off then, isn't it? The, that
Yeah.
part of the seesaw is down and that part is up, and like it's not.
Yeah. Okay, so before we stop the recording and move on to what is next, do you have any other examples of where you have seen cultural or spiritual appropriation in real life and some of the consequences or the resolution or anything that you've seen? I'm trying to think the incident with the braids is the only thing that I can remember.
Mm.
I
Um,
even think about like t tea ceremonies. I plan to
yeah,
incorporate tea ceremonies into my retreats. And so who am I stealing that from? The English, the Asians, the right?
yeah. I mean, well, mindfulness is a huge buzzword.
Mhm.
Its origins are within Buddhism, um, and I believe within Buddhism, found within Buddhism. But that's been very openly taken by the area of therapy that I was talking about that the mood cards are based on. So DBT was the first psychotherapy to adopt mindfulness into it as a treatment package,
Mm.
which when I think about that from the context that you and I are both sat in right now, you're taking something from this area of life and you're turning it into a medical treatment.
Right.
Wow. I don't even know where to go with starting to unpack that. Used mindfulness with clients who have come to see me in the most difficult life circumstances, taken them through a mindfulness protocol.
Mhm.
And actually, we've really started to make lots and lots of, and things have changed and they've got better and they've been able to move on. So you just think, you know, wow,
Right.
on
Right.
that front. So here I am struggling, and actually something that I use every day in the day job
Mhm.
has been influenced and taken from.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it's and again, I guess it's down to that balance, isn't it?
Yeah. It is.
It's down to that balance.
And just being in kindness and compassion and respect, no matter what, even if you are ignorant, respectfully so,
Yeah,
then everything's all right. Yeah.
if you take a position of, I mean, I use the very kind of casual term of clumsy but caring. Your intent is
Mhm.
a really key thing.
Right. Yeah.
And what comes with that is a willingness to be educated when there's education to be had. And you're not just going, well, I do this way and for my own reasons. And with that comes a responsibility to be open-minded.
Yeah.
And yeah, a responsibility to be open-minded, I
A
think is
responsibility to
another.
be open-minded. Yeah. That's going to be
Yeah.
the quote from this episode of whatever this winds up being. Oh,
um,
all right. Well,
yeah,
I think we have pounded on this subject, but maybe we will
we
come up with a
have.
different subject for a different time because this was a lot of fun.
And actually, maybe towards the end of our training, we revisit.
Yes.
That could be fun.
Yeah.
That
What
could be
have we
fun and
learned?
see what changes.
Yeah. Because
Fun for listeners, fun for us.
our teacher actually made the statement, oh, it's not like we're just going around from religion to religion and nicking this and nicking that. It was nicking the British term for stealing things. I love it.
Yeah.
All right, Adam, thank you
Um,
so much.
thank you so much for having me, Lauren.
All right.